would define the good life as a life where one feels happy and proud of what they do. I believe that far too often we get caught up in how we're doing compared to the others around us. We worry that we're not doing enough as them, that we're not making as much money as them, that we aren't as attractive as them. We spend most of our lives comparing ourselves. This is the sole thing that I believe is leading us away from having a good life. We focus on the negatives about ourselves rather than the positives about ourselves.
And to me, the good life is seeking balance among all the things that we have in our lives. But I wonder what our audience thinks. How do you think letting go of the need to compare ourselves with the others can lead to the good life?
I think letting go of these comparisons leads to a good life because it makes us focus on the goals that we achieve in our life. It turns our focus to what we've done that makes us feel happy and proud of ourselves. Having grown up in an American society, I've noticed that it's structured itself to be one that judges others based on their numbers. This society, like many others, measures someone's intelligence based on an IQ number. These societies also measure someone's beauty based on a weight number. We don't think about differences anymore because we've adopted a mentality that feels the need to be similar to those around us. This is a mentality that will ultimately lead us to our deaths, never believing that we once did a thing that we felt happy or proud of. Even the people who society deems as perfect still aren't living the good life because they're constantly comparing themselves as well. You might not see it, but it's happening.
I bet everyone who's listening to this and watching this has ways of comparing themselves to others. For me and a lot of adults, how much I make is often a point of comparison.
What if we stopped focusing on the standards of others and started focusing on the standards of our own? What do you define as success? Is it graduating at the top of your class, or is it simply just graduating? Not everyone is the same. Our world wouldn't be the way it is today if everyone was identical. We have different circumstances, different upbringings, different beliefs, different goals. So why don't we judge ourselves based on accomplishing the objectives we set for ourselves? My definition of greatness may not be the same as yours, and that's okay.
I agree. And I'm a teacher at the San Diego Met High School, and I encounter 50 to 60 people every day. Every single one of my students is an individual with a different background who wants to explore a broad range of internships and who has a different idea about their life after high school. Not a single one of them should have the same goals, and none of them should look to each other to measure their success either.
I began to get to know my definition of greatness around eighth grade when I was in a traditional school setting. It was the same factory process happening every day in, day out. Every single student was held to the same standards, straight A's and perfect behavior in classes. Teachers didn't care if you had to drive an hour to school that day. They didn't care if you didn't have breakfast that morning. They didn't care that you may have been going through a mental health crisis. They just wanted to see test score numbers. I didn't understand why it had to be so factory-like, so I just put my head down and worked. I found myself doing less and less of what I loved simply because I wanted to keep a high grade. I believed that if I wasn't getting the same numbers as the other kids, I was worthless and stupid. And that's what every single kid believed. We all had it drilled into our minds that if we weren't smarter than the kid next to us, we weren't worthy of being called a good student. The main thing that really stuck to me was a reward program called the 4.0 program. The 4.0 program was a reward that the top students with a 4.0 GPA were awarded. You were given a card with your picture on it that allowed you to skip the line at lunch so you could get your food before everyone who had been waiting usually 15 minutes at minimum, more than half of our lunch period. I watched the perfect kids cut in front of me in line with a smile on their face as they displayed their cards to everyone in line. It was almost like they were silently saying, "Look at me, I earned my right to eat before you. I'm smarter than each and every one of you and deserve to eat all my food and enjoy more of my lunch. I never wanted anything more in my life." I kept myself up at night just praying to get all A's at least one quarter so I could have that card. I felt like I needed to prove myself and I always just fell short. My 3.8 GPA suddenly felt worthless because I wasn't getting what the smart kids were earning. I was doing amazing in my classes now that I reflect on it, but I couldn't care less in the moment. I only cared if I had the card.
So from what I'm hearing, you cared more about that card and getting A's than you did actually about learning or growing your skills or discovering your interests. Like the whole point of school was erased because what mattered, what was incentivized, was the grade itself and getting lunch before all the other less smart kids.
Correct. It was so bad for me to the point where I didn't really care if I understood the content I was learning or not. I was more worried about the grades I would receive on my assignments and tests. I wasn't worried if I was growing or not. I was more concerned with numbers. After our third quarter of the year came to a close, I began to think. I sat quietly in the back of my mother's car with a report card reading another 3.8 GPA in my hand. Why is it so bad I don't have that damn card? I asked myself. This is where I started asking the real questions. Was it really that terrible that I didn't have a simple little card that wouldn't mean anything in the next 5 years? Why was I beating myself up over it? I wasn't failing, and that was okay. I wasn't going to be held back. I was going to be promoted to high school on time. I was going to finish with nearly all A's. So why was I beating myself up so much? I was holding myself to a standard that was asking far too much of me. This was my turning point. This is where I began to look at myself through my own standards. I'd gotten a perfect score on a big paper from my history class. That was something I was proud of. I'd made a bunch of new friends that I'd grown close with. That was another thing I was really happy with. When I started looking at all these things that I had done and compared them to what I believed was a good school year, all the anger and sadness over the card melted away. I promoted to high school with all A's and a B. Not too bad. I want you to take a moment after hearing my story and think about a time in your life when you felt this way, like you were putting all your eggs in one basket just so you could achieve something that was deemed good by others. How did you feel? Did you feel stressed, overwhelmed, tired? Think about how doing that work under the standards of others and not your own made you feel.
To me, the good life is about balance. Over the past year, like most people, I was home all day, every day. And while 100% of the time at home isn't exactly balanced, that time did teach me the value of filling my day with people and things that bring me joy. In February 2020, Valentine's Day to be exact, my wife and I welcomed our first child. We tried to plan his birth around when I might have time off, thinking about her maternity leave, etc. As it is, my district generously offers me one whole day of paternity leave. After that, I have to start using up all my sick time. So trying to optimize my time off was very important. Our conversations around these plans never imagined that we'd both be at home all day, every day for his first full year. In the beginning of the pandemic, we could both work from home while our son mostly slept or laid on his boppy, a little cushion that we put on the kitchen island. As Ezra got more mobile, working from home with him became more difficult. And as time went on, we realized we needed a nanny. My wife and I were constantly trading off who was on a Zoom and who was taking care of the child. It was really stressful. When our nanny came to take care of Ezra, I could finally work without an interruption and focus on my job. Except I found myself not wanting to. There was something so wonderful about coming down the stairs to where Ezra was playing, to hearing him call out, "Dada, Dada," as he heard my footsteps. Soon he would run over to me with his arms outstretched, wanting a hug. The feeling of love from my child is magical and magnetic, a feeling more compelling than doing work sometimes, or let's be honest, most of the time.
Would you say that the more time that you spent with Ezra and away from work led you to losing the motivation for your work that you once had? Or did it just feel like he was more of a priority at the time?
I wouldn't say that I lost motivation for work. I would say that having a kid helped me understand the role I wanted work to have in my life. When I was childless, I would get to school an hour and a half before school started, and I'd often be texting with kids until I went to bed. I was unbalanced and I didn't have the right priorities, but I didn't realize it because I didn't have my son. The last year has taught me that the good life means balance. Balance between my work and my family, of course, but also balance in my life more generally. Over the last year, I consistently ran 4 times a week and was even able to increase my weekly mileage. I could walk into my backyard and my fig, avocado, and persimmon trees are blooming and have so much new growth. My chickens were laying more eggs more consistently because they got to roam around more often and I could watch them. I had more time to cook our family's meals. I was living the good life. By December, though, life wasn't so great. 9 months into the pandemic, I was feeling depressed and couldn't figure out why. I asked myself, why am I feeling so low? I have a job, I have a wonderful wife, I have a happy and healthy son, a home, friends, the holidays are coming. I couldn't figure it out. And then I realized I'm missing being in the classroom with kids. I miss the environment, the relationship, the random jokes with kids, the funny but frustrating times I have with them. I miss seeing their faces and hearing their discussions. I miss talking to my colleagues too. Ultimately, after having 2020 to myself to pursue my hobbies and spend lots of times with my family, I lost the balance I was striving for. I needed that classroom full of kids to be part of that balance. The thing is, I'm not saying anything new here. This is all established knowledge. We know that a life that balances our work with our leisure leads to better health and less stress. We give young students recess every day to allow them to get outside, give their brain a break, and socialize. But then we think once kids are 10 years old or so, they don't need those things anymore. A study out of New Zealand showed a 4-day work week leads to more, not less productivity in employees. Employees said that they feel more loyal to their employer and report coming back to work more refreshed, energized, and focused after a 3-day weekend. A similar study in Sweden found that a reduced work week led to employees calling out sick less often and greater overall worker health. And as you start to exceed 40 hours, your risk for stroke and heart disease are both considerably higher.
Interesting. So what you're saying is having less time doing work and a bit more time doing what you love made you feel more happy and energized compared to before the pandemic?
Yes, for sure. And as I transitioned back into pre-pandemic life, in-person school, restaurants, and things reopening, it leads me to frequently self-reflect and ask myself, am I keeping myself balanced? The pedal to the metal approach to working leads to burnout. And as a teacher, that means students aren't engaging, they aren't learning, and ultimately they're the ones that are hurt by my lack of life balance. As our society transitions back into normal life, not governed by the coronavirus, I hope that we remember that the value of taking care of our physical health, of doing meditation and spending time with our family and friends and pursuing our hobbies. I hope that we don't just flip the switch and go right back to the 5-day work week of over 40 hours like we were doing before the pandemic. I hope we aren't stressing to find time for our friends and family and all of life's errands. Can we take a page from other countries and invest in ourselves and our own livelihood? Can we value our society's mental and physical health? Will we acknowledge that women and men spending time with their children is good for the kids and good for the parents and good for our community? The good life is balanced among so many things in our life that compete for our focus and attention. But this balance is essential for a fulfilling life.
Will we continue to compare ourselves? Will we continue to live by the standards of others? Or will we block out the noises in our head and choose to be happy? As I draw closer and closer to applying for college, I know that I'm going to be compared to many others. My GPA, my test scores, my achievements, they're all going to be compared. And I've come to peace with that. I've accepted it as something that I'm not going to allow break me down. I've accepted it as something that I'm not going to allow to break me down or define who I am as a student. Learning to block out this negative voice inside your head is not an easy skill to learn. It can be hard and tiring. But at the end of the day, it truly is one of the keys to living a happy and fulfilling life, the good life.